Hey everyone, and welcome back to From Bits to Bots, the series that we've created in which I show how I learned Arduino. Today we're specifically going to focus on utilizing an LED, as this is the first of our 5 skills challenges. At the end of this, then I will issue a challenge. We want to see what you can do with an LED, or see how you do applying some of the skills that I look at today. So we're going to do 2 things with the LED. The first will be controlling it with a button, which is pretty simple, but a very useful skill to have. And the second is using an RGB LED, which is a unique one with 4 leads that can change color. So without further ado, let's jump into the materials that we are going to need to make this build happen. Real quick, we're going to run through the different things we're going to use for our build here. Obviously, we'll start with our Arduino. I currently have it plugged in, which is why you see these lights on. We're also going to use 2 10K resistors in this first build. For the second build, we'll actually add a couple more, and I'll talk about why when we get to that. But if you don't know how to tell which of your resistors is a 10K versus a 1K or more, you can look at typically wherever that is they're bound together, and they have like a stamp, and it'll tell you what size resistor it is. We also have this tiny little button here. It's very small, but it'll work really well for what we're going to do today. And then I chose a green LED for this first build. Doesn't matter which color you use, obviously. I tend to use the big breadboard just because it gives me more options as I build, but it doesn't really matter in most cases. And then an assortment of wires. For this first one, you're going to need 6 wires. Doesn't matter which colors you choose. I tend to try to match up different pieces just so I can keep in my head, oh, I have the whites going to ground, or the yellows connecting to the input and that kind of thing. The only thing not pictured here that we'll use in the second build is a specific red, green, blue LED that I'll talk more about when we get to that point. So this first build we're looking at is controlling an LED using a button like I've got here. I wanted to start by showing you what this looks like when I put it all together. So I'm going to walk you through what I've got, and then I'll show you the diagram and the code that goes along with this. So from our Arduino here, we have 2 wires that we have connecting our different pins. We have one connected to pin 9, one connected to pin 2. Pin 9 is controlling our output. Pin 2 is connected to our button, which is our input, and comes over here. So it's important to remember that in this case, I have our button connected to pin 2 and our LED connected to pin 9. From there, we have a few other wires that are connected in the middle. This white wire connects us to our 5 volts, so to our power. And then these 2 black wires connect us to ground. Lastly, we have one other wire, that connects us to ground on this button. And I'll talk about why we did that and why we added these resistors. Because you could actually go without using these 2 different resistors and the circuit would work. However, what they do is when we're not pressing the button, there's some background noise that can potentially be picked up by some of the electrical circuit, and it just makes for a cleaner use of electricity and keeps it from escaping without those resistors. So to show you what this looks like, I have the ability, based off what I've done so far, to control this green light by pressing this button. And when I let go, the button goes off, on, off. As promised, here's a chance to see a little bit cleaner version of what I just showed you. So to reorient ourselves, we've connected pin 9 to our LED. We've connected pin 2 to our input button here. We've got our resistors that are helping to decrease some of the background electrical noise. We've got our grounds and our power. The more important bit is our code. The code here is pretty simple. So first, I included 2 constants before I even got into my void setup or my void loop code. By creating constants, what it's doing is it's telling any time in my code that it sees LED or button to refer to specific pins, and we don't want those to change. And then I've written that over here. It's connecting the LED is connected to pin 9. The button is connected to pin 2. Remember, things outside of these dashes aren't going to be read by the code, and they're good instructions to just kind of help remind you or to explain things. Then we get into our void setup, and I've entered my pin mode. This pin mode LED, output sets the LED pin as the output that we want to read. So in the void loop, I decided to use if-else statements. However, you could do it slightly differently and just include 2 different if statements, but it just is a little bit cleaner. So what I've written is if digital read button Digital read is slightly different than digital write. So digital read is telling us that what we want to do is we want to read the input that we're given in a specific set of code. Specifically, we've written if it is specifically low, or if I'm not pushing the button, then we want it to write, we want to leave the LED off. Else, meaning if it's not off, if it's not reading low from the button, then what we want it to do is we want it to write high or turn the light on. Then we have some syntax like our semicolons and our brackets that close it all out. And that's the end of our code. Full disclosure, when I first made this setup, I had two flaws with my design that matched my code. My code was fine. My code said, great. I clicked verify, and then I clicked upload. It said no issues. However, when I then went to push the button, I didn't get any response out of the light because initially this wire, I had connected one port above, which was connecting it to ground rather than connecting it to power. So what I was doing was I was not actually getting any power from this, and I had both ends going to ground. Additionally, I had my light in backwards. I didn't have it in so that the short end was in the correct spot. So the RGB LED has one anode, which is right here on this third leg. This leg is the long leg, and then these other three on the outside are a little bit shorter. We call the long leg the anode, and the other three are cathodes. In our previous example, what we were doing is we were having the Arduino control the anode. But now what we've done is we've flipped it. We're having the Arduino control the three different cathodes, which is what gives us three different outputs. You'll notice otherwise that my setup is fairly similar to what it was before. I've still got a wire connecting that anode to ground. I've got this resistor over here between the button, and I've got the wire taking the button to pin 2. The things that have changed are now I have 3 outputs rather than just 1. So I need to connect each of those using 3 different resistors and 3 different wires. The blue is connected to pin 9, the green connected to pin 10, and the red connected to pin 11. The code for this is much longer simply because you have to define a few more things. However, the important bits of this code that make it different from the previous one are the use, we've still got our constants, we still define all of our inputs and outputs, but we're now also using what are called booleans. And these are functions that allow you to create variability, basically. So we define those within the code for what happens when they're on or off. And then we have our code, which is longer by nature simply because we have more options. But again, we have to define those pin modes. Then we've got our Boolean code. So this is the start of function where you're talking about that variability that's there. Then we have all of our different options. So we've got mode 1, mode 2, mode 3, so on and so forth for the different light colors that are shown. And you want to tell the code what to do using those if-else statements as well. Now, as I said, we're able to create some variability. So if we mix red and blue, or if we mix red and green and red, and all 3 of them, and then an off mode. Hopefully looking at these 2 skills was helpful for you. However, I've really only scratched the surface. We looked at 2 very basic things you can do with an LED, but didn't talk about what to do to keep a light continuously on, using a potentiometer, connecting it to thermal sensors or timers or art projects or lots of other applications that are out there with LEDs. And so what I'd like you to do now is I'd like for you to do our first skills challenge. And what that means is send us a video or a comment or connect to a link of you doing something with an LED and show the rest of our community what you have learned, whether it's you replicating something I've done or something else you see online, or just you practicing and asking a question about how something goes. The more that we share with one another, the more collaborative this becomes and the more we all can learn. See you on our next video where we look at our next skill.